the Opportunity Zone marketplace in 2022. So I have all four of our panelists here today, including me. I'm more the moderator, really. I'm going to turn it over to the real industry leaders to do the bulk of the heavy lifting today. But we're a little short on time. We've got only 20 minutes today, so I want to kind of kick things off really quickly here, everybody. So I'm going to go around the horn real quick and introduce everyone. Catherine Lyons is joining us from Washington, D.C. this morning. She is Director of Policy at the Economic Innovation Group. EIG, if you're unaware, is a bipartisan research and advocacy organization that basically architected the OZ concept several years ago. And today they are focused on the successful implementation of the OZ policy across the country. Thank you, Catherine, for joining us this morning. John Sciarretti joins us from Dover, Ohio. He is partner at Novogradac, a national professional services organization. And John is also the leader of the Novogradac Opportunity Zone Working Group. And finally, we also have Reid Thomas here today joining us from San Jose, California. Reid is Chief Revenue Officer and Managing Director of JTC Americas, formerly known as NES Financial. JTC is the leading fund administration provider in the OZ industry. So to start us off today, actually, John, I'm going to turn to you first in order to get our conversation rolling on the state of the OZ marketplace in 2022. Probably helpful to characterize how large the marketplace currently is. And I know your firm, Novogradac, does an incredible job surveying the qualified opportunity fund industry. What's the total size of the marketplace to date? How much capital has been raised so far by QOFs through the end of last year, according to the Novogradac survey?
Thanks for inviting me, Jimmy. Glad to be here. We actually do a survey. I'd say it's a subset of the marketplace. We're surveying it as of the end of last year. We tend to release our reports quarterly. 1,300 funds, and 978 of those funds actually provide fundraising data to us, and so it gives us anecdotally, a good subset of the market. Our survey, as of the end of 2021, we show over 24 billion invested in opportunity funds. We think it's 3 to 4 times greater than that, which would be 75 to 100 billion dollars, which is, by the way, consistent with what Treasury predicted, on the onset of this program to be about $100 million budget. So it looks like we're going to smash that by the end of the 2026 deadline to invest. But when you look at the growth in that $24 billion number, in 2021 alone, $9 billion was invested, and so 45% of the total dollars that we surveyed came in 2021. In the last quarter, $4 billion of that $9 billion happened, and so that's 74% of that number. So it looks like it's increasing, or the momentum is increasing at an increasing rate, and so we expect good things for 2022.
Yeah, that's great, John. I was going to make that point as well, that Steven Mnuchin, former Treasury Secretary, predicted at the outset of the program that this would be a $100 billion program. $100 billion of private capital would be invested in opportunity zones, was more or less what he said. And I think it's possible we've already hit that number according to your survey and some other surveys floating around out there. Maybe if you factor in debt, there might already be $500 billion worth of projects out there. Is that potentially the case?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So let's turn to Reid now. And Catherine, I'm going to bring you in really quick. Just sit tight. But Reid, you are the leading fund administration platform. JTC Americas is. I believe there's over 150 qualified opportunity funds on your platform to date. Opportunity DB and JTC, our two organizations just collaborated on a survey. What can you tell us about that survey and some opportunity zone trends you can glean?
Yeah, thanks, Jimmy, and appreciate your support on the survey. Mm-hmm. The intent of the survey was really to try to figure out the relationship between investor motivations into opportunity zones and the impact and impact-related tracking elements associated with that. We're really passionate about these kinds of investment opportunities that come along that are really intended to do good, and we want to help make sure that ultimately, the Opportunity Zone initiative gets re-upped and is recognized for all the good it's trying to do. It's amazing. John pointed out, we'll smash the $100 billion mark, but there's all this negative media and the narrative around it. So the purpose of the survey was really to try to narrow that down, and we found some very, very interesting things that I think bode well for the future of the program. Particularly, a couple of things. The investment amounts typically by investors are relatively small, and that's interesting because this narrative that it's only the uber wealthy that are playing in this space isn't really true. Folks, as we heard on the last panel, $50,000 is a minimum. Not that that's an insignificant amount of money, but that certainly opens it up to a wider range of investors. We also found that investors are quite interested in the impact that funds can make, and at least those that claim it, it's the second most important factor next to what the return on investment is in terms of investors who've already invested. But it's the most important factor for aspirational investors. We found, Jimmy, was that those who are interested in investing actually are very focused on the impact benefits of their investment, and according to what they said, would be willing to take a cut in yield. Not that that's necessary. I think it's very possible to have sort of a double win here, but investors are open to looking at that. So I think the key takeaway on that front is if the fund managers would be more upfront about the impact benefits of the projects that they're doing, like job creation or what have you, it would appeal to a wider audience and they'd attract more investors, I think.
Yeah, I found that really interesting takeaway from the survey that we did as well, Reid. The ability to do well by doing good, by making an Opportunity Zone investment, is that concept's very much alive. Catherine, I want to turn to you now and maybe shift gears just a little bit. EIG is at the forefront of a lot of knowledge of the policy changes that may be forthcoming with Opportunity Zones. What might change with OZs in the future, and what is your coalition in particular working on? What are some of the biggest priorities?
Sure. Yeah. So we, as a coalition, we have put together and put a lot of thought into, what kind of legislative improvements would make the policy even more effective in producing better outcomes for these high need communities. And we, have worked with the congressional champions in the House and the Senate, really since the policy's passage, on thinking through some of what those priorities should be and should potentially look like. And so, I think actually everyone on this panel, I believe, signed on to a letter we submitted to the Biden administration early last year, outlining a lot of this. And a lot of them are also consistent with, what we've seen the members of Congress who have led this work say publicly as well. So, in terms of where especially the senators' kind of stated priorities are on this, I mean, Senator Scott has always been a strong advocate for extending the policy by 2 years, so extending that end of 2026 date and the deadline to invest to the end of 2028. Essentially making up for lost time that it took for the regulations to be promulgated. That took about 2 years from the policy's passage. And so essentially this is a perishable incentive. So giving those 2 years back. And so more investors and, funds that were potentially on the sideline while waiting for those rules could get back into the market and still receive the full suite of benefits. So, that's, I think, a priority, one we think makes a lot of sense, especially in this post-COVID, well, we're maybe not quite there yet, but as aspirationally, a near post-COVID, potentially, economic recovery, that will be, I think, really important. The other, I think, the most probably important is reporting requirements. I mean, I think the surveys that we have and some of the earliest reports that we have from Treasury and GAO that look at, the first full year of the policy is really great. But I think, we need to be able to see the the full picture of what is happening across the country. And we don't have that yet because reporting requirements that were part of the original legislation were taken out through the legislative process, the nature by which it was passed. And so, establishing those reporting requirements will be imperative for understanding the effectiveness of this policy, how it can be even further improved, in hopefully its next iteration. That I think has deep and broad bipartisan support across both chambers, in kind of making that a first order priority. We also, there's a few others that we think would be certainly beneficial, especially for operating businesses and encouraging some of more investments in operating businesses. That's a real priority of our group and our organization that's really focused on entrepreneurship. But I think, another area that also makes sense and one that our organization has certainly prioritized is the idea of early sunsetting a small percentage of tracts that exceed a certain threshold of national median family income, replacing those tracts with lower income, high need places that are more aligned with the intent and the spirit of the policy. So I think those are kind of our priorities, some of the stated priorities by the senators, and where I think there could be some potential changes, or if there were to be a package coming together, I think that's where there could be some common ground.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that that last point you brought up in particular would help get the backing of some current detractors of the program. I would hope if we can sunset some of the early sunset some of the tracks that are maybe a little higher income than people would expect from an opportunity zone. So I think three areas of broad support for possible changes are, as you mentioned, transparency and reporting, obviously hugely important. An expansion, maybe opening it up for a couple more years, and then that early sunsetting as well. Let's talk about how the program has already started to sunset a little bit in some regard, right? We had the expiration of that 10% basis step up at the end of last year. And for those unfamiliar, for those listening who are relatively new to opportunity zones, there was a benefit that allowed you to reduce the amount of your initial capital gain recognition by either 15% or 10%, depending on when you first invested. That benefit fully expired at the end of last year. I'm going to go around and ask everybody this question, actually. We'll start with John first, and then Reid and Catherine go in that same order again. How much of a role did that 10% basis step-up expiration play at the end of last year? I think we saw quite a bit of capital flowing in Q4 because that expiration was expiring. That's part one of the question. Part two would be, if anyone's making a nosy investment this year, they've already missed out on that. Is it really that big of a deal? Or at the end of the day, is it a rounding error? How would you characterize that, John?
Well, I think it's definitely accelerated investment, like you mentioned, into the fourth quarter. So folks that could have invested in 22 or 21, why not invest in 21? Right, get the 10%. But when you look at the math, I mean, we've done the math around that benefit, and it really tends to be less than 50 basis points of value on the investment. So if you look at, say, a 10% after-tax return, opportunity zones tend to have an increment of 300 to 500 basis points. So that 10% return starts looking like 13% or 15%. Just with the tax benefits, and that 50 basis points. So you're looking, if you're going to get 14%, now you're going to get 13.50, and it's actually less than 50 basis points. So I don't think it's going to affect folks' decision on whether to invest or not. But I think it did accelerate into the fourth quarter of last year.
Yeah, thanks, John. And Reid, what about you? What are you hearing from some of your QOF clients who are on your platform? Did they see a big inflows into their funds in Q4, possibly because of that big benefit expiring? And then part two, if someone missed out at the end of last year, we've got potential investors on the call today who are interested in nosy investing. Was it a huge deal that they missed out? Should they just ignore the program completely now, or is there still a lot that's attractive about the OZ policy?
Well, it's sort of what John said. I mean, we saw a massive increase in Q4. I think 40% of the year was in Q4, and it was a banner year. We saw more than double the investments into QOZs, at least with our clients, in 2021 versus 2020, which was also a good year. But that said, I think John's correct on the math. We see continued and steady investment. Many of our clients are launching new funds as we speak, so that's a good sign. Even the survey we did, Jimmy, we had 150, I think, investors respond to that survey. There was, more than 75% of the investors thought the amount of investment in opportunity zones would continue to grow over the next 2 or 3 years. It was only less than 10% thought it would actually decline. So I think the spirit for this initiative is still out there. It still makes a heck of a lot of sense for people, and we'll continue to see it grow. I think, it's a shameless plug in a way, but I think that the things that are really going to drive it now as we're seeing more institutional behavior out of fund managers. Are you using third parties to provide transparency and financial reporting? Are you going to be reporting on impact as the legislation is likely to evolve to? So those are going to be important things in differentiating initiatives now, I think, going forward.
Excellent. And Catherine, I don't know if John and Reid may have already hogged up all the talking points, if there's anything left to say, but curious to get your thoughts, if you have any insights into the 10% basis step up expiring at the end of the year, and moving forward. Is it that big of a deal for investors who may be on the call today if they missed out on it?
Well, I think, John and Reid kind of covered the main points, but I'll just actually repeat something that Mike Novogradac said on a recent webinar that we had on a similar topic, that I think the increase in activity certainly propelled in part by the expiration of the step up benefit, but also just the kind of more comfort with the understanding of the market. I think, by last year, we were coming, or at least getting a little bit more comfortable with sort of this new state of affairs that we're in. Everyone kind of has had a full chance to really understand the regulations. We're starting to identify and develop market norms kind of in response to those regulations. And I think there's just a real comfort with using the incentive now. And so that, I think, that was good to hear, because there's more sustainability there. We don't have to be relying on market activity because of the expiration of one of the benefits. I think market activity will continue because, if that's kind of that observation is true, which I think it is, just from anecdotally the conversations we've had too, that, this is just really the increase in activity is in part because people get it, then that will only continue. So I think that would be the only other thing to add to what Reid and John have already said.
Yeah, really good thoughts. Thank you, Catherine. Well, we've only got, I think, 3 or 4 minutes here. If you have a question for us, use the Q&A tool in the Zoom toolbar. I don't know if we're going to get to them or not. I've got one more question for everybody. I want to kind of go around. We'll start with Catherine this time. We'll let you go first here, Catherine, so these two guys don't hog up all the talking points. What do you see for the future of OZs? Kind of just an open-ended question. Any insights you have on the rest of this year and the next several years before the program sunsets? What are you hoping to see? What do you think will unfold with opportunity zones?
Yeah, well, I think, we're already starting to see, or really have already seen, an incredible amount of, incredible investments that have been made, high impact investments, as I think the survey that Reid and JTC did showed, that, and I think, one of the great inputs or outputs, I guess, of that survey was the aspirational investors, and the fact that they are motivated by impact. I think that's really great to hear. So what I think we'll see is even more of the same that we've already been tracking thus far, which is, high impact projects going into opportunity zones, which we already knew, but now the GAO report kind of validated the fact that these are indeed well-targeted, kind of high need places that are worthy and in need of the investment. And so I think we'll see, a diverse range of investments, hopefully more operating business investments. We'd love to see that market continue to expand. But I think we'll start to see more of that in these places, and people who are really motivated by impact in addition to the, into return. I don't think it's an either or. And we're certainly seeing that there are projects that can really meet a community need, but also, deliver on that rate of return as well. And so, I think we've already started to see the policy really fulfill its promise. I think we'll continue to see it do that. Hopefully there will be kind of some legislative changes that are thoughtful in, continuing to improve its effectiveness, and for us to better understand what is actually happening in these places. And I'm really hoping that comes to fruition, so we get a better sense of the full picture, of the market. But I'm very hopeful, very optimistic. Through our work, we get to track a lot of really exciting developments with this policy, and our OZ activity map is a great resource for some of that kind of those anecdotal, evidence, essentially, for funds and projects all across the country that are using the incentive. And so, I think we get the highlight reel, which is great. And I only expect that highlight reel to grow even longer.
Excellent. Well, thanks for your insights there, Catherine. Reid, we'll turn to you next. Future of OZs. What do you hope to unfold? What do you think we'll see?
Well, what I certainly hope is that this connection between the good that the initiative is actually doing gets better recognized by policymakers. I think within the investor base, there's work to do certainly as well. But it's interesting to me that this is, first and foremost, this is an economic development incentive, but it gets characterized often as a tax incentive for wealthy folks. And I think, when you have the kind of money that's moving into these communities, and we have seen significant evolution in terms of the types of projects, not that operating businesses are necessary to claim success in opportunity zone investing, but I do think it's an important indicator, and we are seeing increase in the number of opportunities to invest in operating businesses. So overall, I think the narrative will continue to evolve. There'll be an enlightened sort of, oh my gosh, this really is an economic development program that's working, and it'll ultimately be extended and made permanent, I think.
Well, that would be great. And John, I'll turn to you for some final thoughts here on where you think OZs are going and the future of the program. We only have about a minute left.
Yeah, not fast. I was encouraged by Shay's comments that there is legislative activity, for an extension and also for reporting. And I think those are the two things that I think will bring institutional money in the program. I mean, they can, if they have reporting and kind of look to the future of maybe a series of extensions or perpetual extensions every 2 years, the institutional money, might be more comfortable on that, and that would just be better.
Fantastic. Well, I think we're going to wrap there. Thank you again to all of my panelists. John Sciarretti is from Novogradac and Company, and Reid Thomas from JTC Americas, formerly NES Financial. Catherine Lyons from the Economic Innovation Group. Thank you to the three of you for participating in the panel this morning. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, Jimmy.